While much of the world has responded to COVID-19 with varying degrees of social lockdown, Sweden has gone its own way. Schools, gyms, shops, restaurants, bars and the country's borders all remain open. Everyone's still at work and gatherings of up to 50 can go ahead. Larger gatherings are out, universities are closed, but the only enforced isolation is for the elderly. Forget flattening the curve, this is all about riding the curve out to reach herd immunity.
Herd immunity is a concept that everyone in the population is protected even if they're not vaccinated, because enough people have been infected to stop the disease from circulating.
Now, Swedish officials say herd immunity could be reached in Stockholm within a few weeks.
This is a marathon, it's not a sprint, and I think that the strategy we have chosen has the benefits of being able to continue for a very long time.
But critics of the plan are warning it could end in disaster.
To achieve herd immunity, you need more than 60% of the population infected. By the time you get to about 6%, you'll shut everything down because your health system is falling over and it's a really severe worst-case scenario.
In its quest for herd immunity, Sweden has had around 189 deaths per million people. That's higher than the 142 people per million who've died in the US and way more than here in Australia, where the figure is just 3 people per million. Still, Sweden seems to think it's a strategy that will pay off in the long term.
I think those countries have locked down totally. Then they have to be much more careful than we need to do when we open up again.
Sarah Coates-Chandler is an Aussie living in Sweden's capital, Stockholm. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us. Do you think Swedish people trust the government's approach?
I think Swedish people have an overall trust of the government, and that's from the experience that they have that the Swedish government will look after them. So I think that trust in the plan comes from that overall trust. But there is dissent. There's not 100%, and not everybody's behind this. So there's a 50-50 split, I would say, right from the top, from the experts right down to people on the street.
Sarah, are you nervous at the moment? I mean, Sweden appears like they're rolling the dice. They're the only European country taking this measure. Does that make you nervous?
Absolutely. I mean, it is a bit disconcerting when everybody around you is shut down. But actually, most people here are taking responsibility. The scenes that you see on the TV with people out and about, that's in the minority. Like, most people are at home. Most people are working from home. We have our kids at Swedish Förskola. That is what the recommendation is, but we're not going out, and most people are taking it serious. So that alleviates some of my anxiety.
So the Swedish government approach is interesting because they're basically saying, we trust you, the population, to do the right thing. We trust you to observe social distancing. We don't need to enforce laws, lockdowns, all of that sort of thing. Do you think there's actually something unique about Swedish culture that makes this possible that wouldn't apply in other countries?
There is something slightly unique about Swedish culture, and it starts from when they're very young, that you give children a choice and you give them the option, and that's how people are raised here. There is a problem in that doesn't necessarily cut through with the migrant population, and that's quite large in Sweden at 25%, the largest in Europe.
And just personally, how are you doing, Sarah? How are you holding up with this?
I think like everybody else, we're up and down. But I mean, we do have our freedom. We can go to the forest and we have a regular schedule. We get up and take our kids to nursery, and we both work from home. We're choosing to be responsible to hopefully alleviate the burden. So it is an anxious time, absolutely.
Well, stay safe, Sarah. Thanks so much for speaking with us tonight.
No problem. Thank you for having me on.
Well, we wanted to see what a local expert made of Sweden's surprising approach. So we spoke to epidemiologist Gideon Meyerowitz-Katz a little earlier. Gideon, thanks very much for joining us. Clearly Australia's on a very different path here, but Sweden rely on their experts as well. Are they on to something at all here?
I think it's important to remember, with an approach that looks to herd immunity, to getting a sufficient proportion of the population infected with the disease that they will become immune, that there's a cost, there's a consequence to that happening. And we know with COVID-19 that somewhere between 0.3% and 0.6% of all the people who are infected are likely to pass away. We also know that between 60 to 70% of people need to be infected for the disease to stop spreading in a population. And in Sweden, a country of 10 million people, it means that roughly 20,000 people would die.
So, Gideon, you're talking about this as a trade-off, like there's a trade-off between herd immunity and then lockdown, and the price is in deaths. But Sweden seems to be talking about it differently. They seem to be saying in the long term, if you take this approach, you probably end up with fewer dead. because you can control this more, you can sustain this sort of approach far longer than you can with lockdown, and then eventually lockdown breaks open and then you have a real disaster.
To say that they will definitely be better off or definitely be worse off in a year's time is, in my opinion, folly. We simply don't know. But we know quite well what will happen if we do let the disease spread. There's a very good estimate of the numbers of people who will die in that case. So we can say potentially in the future there may be some good things, but the bad things that will happen very soon, well, we know about those quite well.
What's fascinating about this is that Sweden is relying on Swedish culture to make this happen. Do you think, given that Australians are sort of comfortable now with social isolation, we've done a really good job of it, that we would be capable of doing this model?
I think the time has probably passed for Australia to adopt a Swedish model, as you could say, because we've already implemented a lot of the things that we have, and you can't just reverse time. But I do think that eventually we'll have some things open as Stockholm does now.
Gideon, if we were having a dinner party, you've had a wine or two, you're starting to relax, and I said, are you confident we're going to come out of this okay? What would your answer be?
The same thing I've been saying to my friends and family and most people who've asked me over the last few weeks, the token epidemiologist, that Australia is probably one of the, if not the best placed country in the world. We have a strong economy, we have an incredible public health system, and so far, by all accounts, we are doing extremely well.
You know what I would say? Why the hell are you having a dinner party? Don't you know about the sort of restrictions that
It's a
apply?
virtue. It was on Zoom. It was on Zoom, wasn't it, Gideon?
It's a Skype dinner party.
This is a bad example, Gideon. I apologise that Pete put you in that position. It's really not professional. But we thank you very much for your expertise. We appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.